use of the property. And then the code then allows, so that's why it says may here, the code then allows up to 30% of a business to be accessory retail. And so that's the balance that's before you tonight from the applicant, is a 70% liquor lounge use, 30% accessory retail use. This item was reviewed by the Planning Commission at their last meeting, held a public hearing that was noticed around that property, and there were no other comments except for the applicant who was present at that meeting. Both the Planning Commission and staff recommended approval. Since the meeting, the applicant has had some conversation with staff with some questions about some of the conditions of approval. We've gone through in more detailed conversation with the applicant some of the rationale and sections of the code where things are required. And generally, they've agreed to move forward subject to those conditions, including that 70-30 breakdown of principal liquor lounge use to accessory retail use. The number of seats, as detailed in code currently right now, places a minimum number of 30 and a maximum number of 35, and that would be located within that 70% of the liquor lounge area. And then as that retail sale is accessory to the liquor lounge use, there are some details in the conditions of approval related to the type of product that can be sold at the location. Just to give you a little bit of quick background on the site, the existing building here is shown along 4th Street. County records show it was constructed, the building generally was constructed in 1957. It's approximately 26 feet wide and 77 feet deep. Commercial, single-story commercial building. Again, it operates exclusively today as a retail establishment. There is kind of a rear portion of the building that until recently had a hair salon located in it. Again, the conditional use permit for conversion to this liquor store with accessory retail use is required under the zoning code. The applicant's proposing to have a self-serve tap system with sale of pizza associated with that. And then again, as we talked about, the 70-30 breakdown of the use. And then just finally, kind of in this briefing section, it's just to remind the council, tonight we are talking about the land use and zoning sections of the use. A condition of approval associated with this conditional use permit would be that the applicant apply for a liquor license that governs where and how alcohol is consumed on the site. The applicant lists some a website link that's detailed in your staff report. That website lists some just general example pictures of what the self-pouring tap system will look like. So the pictures on the screen are from that same website. I'm sure the applicant who's in the audience can tell you more about his vision and his connection with the vendors to supply that. Included in your packet is a breakdown of the conceptual floor plan of the applicant's location. In this case, to the right side of your screen is 4th Street, or the general main entrance off the street, and the back entrance off here again on the left side. Originally, what the applicant had proposed was to have the liquor lounge in the rear section of it, and then once we talked about the 70-30 breakdown and the seats kind of thing, that's when he proposed this, which is generally consistent with that 70-30 breakdown. It's anticipated that there'll be a more detailed floor plan that will be necessary with the liquor lounge, or excuse me, the liquor license, which will, get closer down to the exact measurements of the site. And this drawing before you here again shows 51 seats, so exceeding the 35. So they would need to come down in seats. And those are conditions detailed in the resolution and staff report before you tonight. From the application, the applicant has only indicated that there would be some changes, that the front of the building would continue to look the same, but the rear of the building would have some basically floor to ceiling windows installed in the backside of the building. So with that, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval of the item before you, subject to the conditions listed in your staff report and the accompanying resolution. And with that, I'd take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lindahl. Can you speak a little bit to the reasonably necessary and incidental to the conduct of the primary use of such building or principal use? So that seems to be the crux of it. I understand what the applicant is, what their end goal is. I'm not sure we're able to do it within our zoning code, but I really don't care what businesses want to do, but it has to operate within inside that. So I know the store well, and it sounds like within our zoning code, that's not really possible based on this reasonable, necessary, and incidental to the conduct language. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit further.
So, Mr. Mayor, just so I make sure I understand your application, you're talking about the breakdown of the 70-30 and how that relates to the accessory section of the code?
My understanding is the 30%, you correct me if I'm wrong, it means if you've got a brewery in the back and out front, you can sell some shirts that have the brewery's name on it. It can't just be a clothing store, right? That's my understanding. So,
Correct. So not so, if your question is not so much about the floor percentage breakdown, but about the clothing and the products sold.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, yes, that's staff's interpretation. If you look at the definition of what accessory is, when it talks about that it is reasonably necessary and connected to the principal use, the conversation that staff has had around this internally and again with the applicant is, in staff's view, you take a strict look at the code from that perspective. In staff's view, if the items that would be sold here are required, it's very clear under code to be accessory. That the principal use has to be the liquor lounge use. That it's the choice to have accessory retail on top of that. And the code is very specific that can exceed, that accessory retail cannot exceed 30%. Those standards are in the code. So then if you look at what the definition of accessory use, and it talks, as the mayor just talked about it being necessary and incidental to the actual principal use, that's where staff has come up with the language about what sort of product could be sold with that. So you would be able to go in and the applicant would be able to sell products related to that business. But the idea is that makes it accessory, that if they sold products beyond specifically branded for that business, then they're really more of a general retailer. And that is counter to the idea of it being accessory to that business.
Okay. I'm just trying to wrap my head around what would ever be reasonably necessary to selling beer. I mean, T-shirt's not, it never is, so what would fall under that bucket? And that's what I'm struggling with here, because I understand what the end goal is of the applicant, and I'm wondering if, are there other avenues to achieving this? Is it really two separate businesses from a zoning standpoint? But I'll leave it at that. Council, any questions for Mr. Lindahl? Councilmember Hughes.
Yeah, I have dumb questions. So in other land use issues, we can offer a variance. We can't offer any variances in this?
So, Mayor, members of the council, variances under state law, and or case law, I should say, and I'm sure the city attorney can confirm all this for us, but under case law, variances can only be granted from dimensional standards. So you can vary from a height, you can vary from a setback, you can vary from a number of parking stalls that are required, but you can't vary from a use. Uses are specifically defined in the districts, and those you can't vary from.
So we couldn't vary the 30/70?
The 30/70 is a percentage standard. It is defined in the code as a specific standard, so I guess I might defer to the city attorney on that one.
Mr. Gilchrist.
Mr. Mayor and Council, my initial impression to that is that you could grant a variance to that if that's requested. The use variance prohibition is really use X is allowed in districts 1, 2, 3, but not 4, you can't variance it into 4, that sort of thing. So that's where the use prohibition comes into play. But this sort of, I agree, it's not a dimensional standard, but it's a standard in the code that's not based on the use necessarily. So I think it's within the realm of what a variance can.
And what about the seating?
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I would say, again, the seating is a specific standard listed, and it's a number. I think the council could, under the same rationale from the city attorney, choose to vary from that. I would just mention a couple of things. Those two things that we're talking about are the limitation on the amount of accessory retail and the number of seats are specific standards that were placed into the code. So these aren't numbers that staff just set as a standard here. This is what the community at some point, when they enacted the code, determined were the appropriate numbers. And with at least to the idea about the number of seats, the idea, staff's interpretation of the spirit and intent behind the two limitations that are placed on liquor licenses, or excuse me, liquor lounges, that they can't exceed 1,500 square feet, and they have to have a certain minimum and no more than a maximum number of seats, that it was the city's intent to create some pretty defined boundaries to that specific type of use, because they were carving out an establishment that can sell liquor that isn't a full restaurant use. So that it isn't a restaurant bar use, which is the typical business model if you're also serving alcohol.
Mr. Gilchrist.
Mr. Mayor and Council, just one quick appendage or add-on to what I just said about the variance. Can and should are two different questions. I answered the can question and not the should.
And I've got one more.
Can I just quickly add on to the seating? That also comes into play, as Mr. Lindahl said, with the liquor license, which we are not talking about tonight, but that seating is consistent with other liquor lounges in the community, and I do not recommend the council deviate from that number.
Gotcha. When we're talking about their logoed clothing, in this particular instance, the retailer has defined himself as beyond the specific name of his retail establishment, but also sort of defined himself in some ways as, I'm not trying to speak for you too much, but you're kind of the clothing area of White Bear Lake, and, we've got hip T-shirts and wear that sort of represents this city as well. And even though it's not all the Minnesotan, it's kind of city branded in some ways. And is there a way to sort of say, even though, I guess I'm just saying, there's a lot of what he's done is not, is unique to his establishment, even though and unique to this area, which while it doesn't have his singular logo on it, I think you could kind of argue he created. I don't know. You're looking at me funny, like I'm not making it. Some of his design work is unique to him, even though it uses city-owned names. I guess I don't really know how to say it very well. Like he's got the Hippodrome. He's got a cool shirt with that on there that nobody else is selling that he designed. And even though that doesn't have his logo on it, it's his design. And I guess I'm just saying it feels like that could be considered in his retail sale, even though it doesn't have his. And I guess I'm wondering, could it be, or are we pretty specific? It's got to have the Minnesotan logo on there. And
So, Mayor, members of the council, what we have before us tonight is, admittedly, and we've had this conversation with Corey, is that he's presenting a pretty unique use. We struggled to find anything comparable in looking at it. So, what we've brought to you tonight is staff's best interpretation on a admittedly conservative side of, and trying to give you an analysis based on what the code strictly says. We think it's very clear about the 1,500 square foot rule. We think it's very clear about the maximum 30% for accessory retail. There was some interpretation about the limitation to the products that are sold there. But I think the rationale, the general idea that they should be accessory to the actual principal liquor lounge use, which is what the site becomes under zoning, that we also think is pretty clear. The challenge is defining what what accessory means. I think it's pretty clear to understand that if you could go in there and you could buy a toaster, that's not something that is accessory, that if he was selling other kinds of items, that would be more like general retail. The way we tried to think about it was, if you were at the hair salon that was here beforehand, if you walked into the hair salon, you could buy products related to hair, brushes, shampoo, other kind of spa-related items that would be typically associated with the principal hair salon kind of use. You wouldn't go in there and expect to buy a set of tires. So the challenge is defining that accessoriness.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mayor, members of the council, in addition, there's been significant work on this at the staff, city attorney, and the state level just to discuss this, because this is very unique. This is not a typical request that comes through any community in Minnesota and at the state level, so we've had that discussion. And a retailer cannot sell liquor, bottom line. That's pretty clear at the state level, so that's another reason for this split, and you cannot commingle the two. The state's been very clear with my office on that. So they have to remain a separate accessory use.
I know, that's helpful. And the reason I was belaboring the point with the reasonable and necessary is because what we have before us is pretty simple. Can you change from retail to a liquor lounge? Yeah, that's within our zoning code, go for it. But we know what the end game is, which is why I'm trying to have the conversation at the forefront, because this will circle back to us through a liquor license, and we're going to have to address it. So in the interest of trying to be as efficient as possible with time, we know these are the issues that are going to come up. So that's for the council's edification and those in the audience. I understand what the end game is, but to a large degree, our hands are tied, again, based on state law. So any other questions or comments? Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to apply the lessons from our previous topic. Would the applicant be eligible to apply for additional seating on the sidewalks? And how does that work with the minimum of 30, maximum 35?
Mayor, Councilmember Berg, that's a really good question that we haven't evaluated yet. You do ask good questions. We have not evaluated that. I don't know off the top of my head. We could evaluate that. If you had the right of way, then yes, but the number of seats, that would have to be evaluated. And obviously would have to be compact and contiguous.
And would it be possible perhaps to have seating in the front on 4th and in the back off the parking lot?
I
believe so. No, that's not public. Paul is shaking his head at me.
don't think there's enough space.
Right,
Mayor, members of the council, the parking lot behind the store is a public parking lot. We'd have to look at exactly where the right-of-way, a lot of the buildings are, just off of right-of-way lines, some are set right on the property line, so I'll call it the right-of-way or the parking lot that we own start immediately following. The width in this area is probably fairly prohibitive of doing any kind of sidewalk seating or seating in the rear of the store towards the parking lot. It's just so narrow. Likely it would not fit.
Okay, just curious.
Mayor, members of the council, I would just also offer on the outdoor seating topic is, in the conditional use permit standards for liquor lounges, it also places a limit of outdoor seating of no more than 20 seats. That within the context of it existing prior to our sidewalk ordinance, obviously, because we're just talking about that tonight. So I think it's safe to presume that that is intended for outdoor seating that would be on their property. And then we would have to look further into how the sidewalk cafe would apply to this particular site.
Councilmember Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, the business can evolve into something else under our ordinance with the 70-30 rule. As far as increasing the seats, I'm not interested, council. We've had enough problems with just liquors. That's where our problems come with enforcement, calls of concern. Go back to looking at that statistic as just serving liquor. I'm not interested in expanding that. That's just my personal thing, but that's what I would vote to say no, live within our ordinance. As far as voting it for it all overall, as long as you don't ever print Hill Murray stuff again, you got my vote. Keep on printing Hill Murray. No, I'm kidding. Not really. But you got to print, North Dakota stuff. Right. But seriously, I just think we got to live within our means on this first one. That's my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think the last slide, it seems to me that you've represented this as a negotiation, an agreement. I mean, the applicant's here. Maybe we could hear from him. Maybe we don't need to. But I assume there's agreement with these conditions. Am I reading that right?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, the last conversation I had was that the applicant was agreeing to these conditions and wanted to move forward.
Okay. I'll move approval of the resolution then.
Well, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion second. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries and the resolution passes. Item 9, discussion. We have nothing scheduled. Item 10, communications from the city manager. Ms. Crawford.
You have a couple slides here. Ramsey County has a survey right now for their All Abilities 2050 transportation plan. This is a long-range plan that will guide transportation projects accessible to people of all ages and abilities. So I do suggest that people do respond to the survey. More information is on that slide there, and just click that and then search All Abilities 2050 transportation plan. Next slide, we have some upcoming events. The Wiper Area Chamber of Commerce 2023 legislative reception is Thursday, March 7th. I had previously given you a different date, so that is an updated date from 4:30 to 7 p.m. Registration is required. I do ask the council to consider attending if you're able, and to register at that, or tell me to register for you. And then we will be a presenter at AV America, their annual conference. We'll be a case study presenter. That is March 1 through 2 in San Francisco. Ms. Shimmick will be presenting on our behalf regarding the Bear Tracks project. So it's pretty neat that they invited us to present there. So I think that's all I have for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions for Ms. Crawford? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. A motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.